I'd like to say a few words about the intellectual poverty and incapability of the conservative ideology. For instance, the conservatives usually think that they are stopping other people from over-ambitious plans and projects, social projects, I mean, and they are stopping them from the realization of those projects, and that's why they perceive themselves as men of reason, but the core of conservatives is not rational. It's irrational and sentimental. What's more, the conservatives usually tend to produce idealized utopias, and just like socialists tend to do, but those utopias that those conservative utopias, they have some connection to the past, but very remote and very poor connection to the past, to the reality of the past. Usually, the past that is remembered by conservatives is so much idealized that it's more like a fairy tale than the real life. For instance, the conservative many visions about the Middle Ages that conservatives continue to present is not. It's like a fairy tale. It's like Cinderella more than like a real world when the people were dying around their 30s because of the problems with their teeth, for instance, that they couldn't heal. So they were dying in a very early age, and there was virtually no science, no real medications, no real everything. So the society was based on inequality and oppression, and the feudal lords were treating other people, the people which were not members of the nobility, they were treating them as cattle and cows and horses, and not like people. So of course the Middle Ages is not the fault of the conservatism, because the doctrine of conservatism is the byproduct of the Enlightenment period and the Enlightenment movement or period, because it's not really clear if the Enlightenment is more like a historical period or movement, intellectual movement. It's more like a period, because but it's don't while we stop with digressions. But the conservatists usually think that they are stopping the man's insanity, and that's insanity. What they mean by insanity is introducing reasoned and talked project that were talked through in reality, and they think it's not rational, although those projects can be very rational. So they are thinking that they are guardians of mankind from its own projects, its own extreme tendency to change everything around. But we can just as easily, and maybe with more sense, we could avert this situation. For instance, we could perceive these rational liberals as the guardians of the society and its compatibility and everything, and the social order, from conservatists who are very often using many historical religious or national ideas and reactions to promote their doctrine and ideology. So it's rather the liberals which are controlling the conservative insanity than the other way around, although the conservatives feel it differently. For instance, in China, there is a tradition of Confucianism, and the Confucianists Confucianism is a very conservative doctrine, especially in relation to the family and to the hierarchy and so on. It resembles our conservatism, our Western conservatism, but it's also rational. And for instance, these more liberal and more reformistic Taoism, which is also the other the other dominant ideology slash philosophy slash religion in China, is very liberal in terms of the change and so on, but it's very sentimental. It's not so much. It's very mystic. It's not so rational. So we see that it's possible to have the rational conservatism controlling, in course of the history, the irrational reformistic thought. So we can see how very much how random and how uncertain this political divisions could be, and how much depends on the culture of the region. So going back to this intellectual poverty of conservatism, I could quote British Austrian-born classic liberal, but it's not really a classic liberal, because such thing as classical liberalism does not exist, because the first liberals were not libertarian-like. They were rather social-like, but it's another problem. Like John Locke, for instance, when we see the first liberal thought, the first liberal project of Locke, of Montesquieu, we can see that the matter of liberalism is not so much about economy, it's more like about society, about equality of rights. The core of the liberal ideology is the equality of rights, not the free market economy. Free market economy is one of the effects of the equality of rights. But if, for instance, if like in the United States today, the the free market conservatives, they are promoting the system in which the state is so much limited that everything turns to some sort of an oligarchy of very rich people that can then do nothing virtually and pay no taxes and so on, because they are perceived as job creators, even if they are not, because they are moving everything and outsourcing everything to India or something. So we can see how poor this construction is, but and how little it has to deal with. It has to do with the real liberal doctrine, which is the doctrine of the equality of rights. So also the equality of taxation, and it's not equal if the richest are paying as much, as big as a percent from their profit as the poorer people, because it's not rational and it's not equal, because as the communitarians today say to us, and especially in America, this movement has very sparkling ideas and has still so much to do, and it's very important movement. These communitarians, they are promoting this vision of very rich people that are taking profit from the taxes they are paying to the state, because, for instance, the whole infrastructure and the whole roads and airports and everything is at their disposal because they are paying taxes. So a huge, relatively a big portion of their private company profits comes from this results from all this infrastructure that was built with public money. So it's but back to Hayek and his vision of conservatism. Hayek has observed that conservatives not only tend to take sides with socialism about the role of the state and about the limiting the possibilities of playing the rules of the free market economy, but also that conservatism is an ideology that is not cannot really do anything, because it castrates itself from all in real intellectual influence, because conservatism is based on fear of people, of fear of change, and of the lack of confidence in men, the lack of trust of men and her capabilities. That the conservatives think basically that people are incapable of making world better. That's why if they are wanting to promote some positive program and not really negative only doctrine based only on fear of change, of coming change, they must borrow some elements from liberal doctrine, as Hayek has elaborated this topic in his 1960 published work Constitutional Freedom, that the conservatism are not independent intellectually, so they are also so much strict on moral, on everything that is that has to do with morality, that they are also incapable very often with working with people of different Weltanschauung, of different vision, of different ideology, and that's why they are also forced to borrow some elements of the liberal doctrine to fight the other elements, which I think they are more threatening to the conservatism and to their own doctrine. The Polish author Wysakowski, but Tomasz Wysakowski, he wanted to elaborate a little bit on this social phenomena social phenomenon that is the tendency of elderly people to be more socially conservative, to be more intolerant, to be more racist, to be racist, to be intolerant of other people's way of living, of their behavior, and also this tendency of elderly people to be more and more convinced that the world is coming to some sort of social or moral disaster, and that the world is decadent. And he was convinced that he was quoting several science reports, for instance, from the paper that the paper entitled "Current Directions in Psychological Science," and he was quoting one of people published in that paper, William von Hippel, the Australian scientist. He was thinking that there is a very strong connection between the problems that the brain is suffering in elderly age and those social fears so typical for the conservative attitude. exerted by so many elderly people. Wysokowski was reminding that what he really thinks is not that in this equation he's not talking about the conservative doctrine, but he's only talking about the conservative attitude, and he thinks it's not the same. But I think it's really the same, because conservatism, the ideology that is based on human fears, and its irrationalism is so much visible because of that fact. For instance, the Confucianism, that is more rationalistic type of conservatism, conservative-like ideology, is not so much fear-stricken. And so we can see that conservatism is the ideology that was not only created by the liberal thinkers like Edmund Burke or Joseph de Maistre, who were no longer convinced that people can reform everything in a perfect order, and they started at one point. That point was the French Revolution, and they were interpreting French Revolution in a very false light, very false way, because the French Revolution was really a clash between liberal and Republican politicians, and those two liberty-based ideologies. So, but they were thinking that the horrors of the French Revolution was not the product of some clash, but they were of different ideologies. But it was the product of the men's incapability of reforming the state and society. And that's why they invented conservatism as an ideology. But this ideology is never and still is not complete. It must borrow several elements from liberalism or socialism also, because, for instance, the strong position of the state, the authoritarian elements of both doctrines are very similar, although, of course, conservatism is hierarchic and socialism is egalitarian, at least in theory they are. So, but they are forced to borrow those elements of other ideologies because conservatism is not complete. It's an sentimental, incomplete doctrine, and that's why it shouldn't be trusted.